What's up, Leron here. Today I'm going to show you how I did this painting. What's up, Leron here. Thank you for joining me in another video. I'm recording this from the inside of my new studio. I should give you a proper tour, but here's just a quick look. Here's where I work and where I record. This is the station. Here I've got the mini library with all of my tools and materials. But in any case, what I want to share with you today is this painting process, as I just showed you, that I just finished. Now, because it's the first time I'm recording here inside the studio. I'm not sure how the audio is like or what it is like. I did a few tests beforehand and it seemed okay, so hopefully it is. So in this painting process, there's a lot going on. Let me show you once again, and I will remove the tape after the process. So if you want to catch that, make sure you watch till the end or just skip to the end. There's a lot going on here. I think there are many lessons to learn from this process because I made a lot of mistakes and I was able to correct some of them. So this really goes to show you that nothing is really permanent. You can fix mostly any mistake you do as long as you don't go too dark. So I'm going to show you that. Also, in terms of the process and the work order, I tried some new things that really challenged me, and I wasn't expecting myself to work in that particular order, but I just went with it and it worked out fine. So there's a lot to be said about spontaneity and doing things as they feel at the moment while still having an organized process. Okay, so I hope you're going to enjoy this process. It's a long one, but I'll probably cut it a little shorter. So let's begin. Let's get started.
Okay, so I'm starting by spraying some water actually on the painting. And to give you a little bit of a background, I wasn't sure how to tackle this one. I wasn't sure if I want to start with the truck and then focus on the background or let it all mix in the first wash. This was very challenging for me for some odd reason. So I decided to find the middle road and not do wet and wet completely, but rather just spray some water from the mister or the spray bottle, and that way it kind of loosens things up a little and it allows the paint to move around. I find that helps me when I want to do wet and wet, but I do want to preserve some control. So what I'm doing here is I'm applying a background the background color, and I'm choosing yellow because I want to stress or emphasize that it's strong sunlight, okay? So I'm not using a gray or muted or dull blue. I'm actually using yellow, and then for the truck I'm going to mix my own green together with some sap green. So it's not going to be the same shiny green. I'm just adding a bit of red to the foreground now just to make it a little more interesting and to warm it up, just because I like the way it looks. I love this combination of yellow and red, and I like the way it works. Just to give you a bit of a background on this painting, now I'm very aware of my edges, so I'm going to put in the green. To give you some background on the reference photo, this is actually a photo I took. I took this picture. I was walking down the street, and it was at a time when I was used to taking a lot of photos of what I see so that I have some painting material. So I took a picture of this scene, and the funny thing is I didn't capture the whole scene in one picture. I have one picture that you can see on the right top right corner, and then I cut the other worker in another picture. Okay, so it's actually split into two references that I'm combining here into one painting, and I will show you the other one later on. Okay, I'm putting some orange here for the kind of a color of a vest for the workers. So yeah, this is how I came to paint this picture. I made the drawing based on the two different pictures and sort of united it into one. I'm now going back over the truck because I feel like it needs some strengthening. The green needs to be stronger. And by the way, I did the drawing before I went to the month-long vacation. And so it's been a while. Some time has passed from then to now. So now I'm moving on to the second wash, and this is the more, by the way, everything you were watching is double speed, okay? I ran it at double speed because the process was quite long, and I felt like this was a good pacing. So now I'm getting into what I think is the hardest wash, because here I have to create all of the I would say, give this volume, create all the light and shadow. And so I started with these kind of lighter values to add some of the lighter shadows in. And then I ended up, when I'm getting to the bottom of the truck, doing the darker colors as well. And you're going to see this later on. So it also shows how spontaneously, at the moment, I decided to add some more things that I didn't necessarily plan on. Now, I want to say a word or two about the materials I'm using. I'm using my silver black velvet brushes, which I like a lot. For the initial wash, I used my, which brush is it? The Leonard brush, size 6. It's the large mop brush. And now I'm using the silver black velvet. The paper is Saunders-Waterford. It's 300 GSM. I'm using my Magello 18 Wells palette. The colors I'm using are, I'm actually using one Daniel Smith, I believe. No, actually, no. I'm using one SAA, the French Ultramarine, and then two PWC paints, the Cadmium Red Light and the Indian Yellow or Cadmium Yellow. I don't remember which one. It could also be the SAA. But basically a warm yellow, a warm red, and then a warm blue all together. Okay, so yeah. Now I'm starting to give this truck a bit of volume and depth by adding the shadows. So you can see it starts to feel like something, but the real magic is going to happen once I get to the wash down below. And that's when it's going to really shine. And I remember I shared this in an Instagram post. I shared the first wash and then I was tempted and I couldn't help myself, but I had to share everything. So I ended up sharing a few hours later this more advanced version where you can actually see some of the light and shadow, which I think is really, really nice. And you're going to see this come together in just a few moments right in front of your eyes. On a side note, I'm waiting for an important phone call, so I may have to pause the recording, so you'll forgive me if it sounds like it's not completely continuous or something like that. Sorry about that. So in any case, now this is a really hard part because I have to read through what I see and try and simplify all the shapes, because it's just shapes. I love to look at everything as just random shapes, not random, but rather abstract shapes. So I'm negative painting around some details there, darkening only where I see the shadow, and I'm going to zoom in a little more later on the picture so you can see it better. I find that taking a lot of pictures of things that interest you is really important, because then you end up with a lot of reference to paint. And sometimes I will feel uninspired to paint a particular scene and more inspired to paint a different scene. And for those instances, I think it's really important to have that variety. And this is something I didn't do enough of when I got started. And these days, I really take a lot of pictures, and sometimes I'll be driving, so I'll ask the person driving with me. Hopefully there is someone like that. I'll ask them to take a picture for me if I see something that really captivates me. Because you do have that jolt of inspiration, and if you can capture the picture of that very same moment, later on when you work on it inside, you'll see that it does work. Now, did you see me just now dabbing some of the paint? If not, rewind the video. This, I think, entire process is a lesson in how you can correct any mistake, because I constantly paint over areas I shouldn't have painted, and then I go back with a piece of paper towel or my towel and just dab it out. And it happened to me so many times during this process that it's embarrassing. And it's just lack of concentration sometimes. I don't know. Sometimes you can't help it and you make a mistake. That's fine. But it really was... it really happened a lot with this particular process. So anyway, now you start to see how the shadow gives this feeling of being a solid object, the entire truck. And this is something that now when I'll complete the left section as well, you'll see this. Now the colors I'm using, I forgot to mention, I'm using sap green as well as a mixture of green of my own. So the sap green I used for the base wash, but now I'm starting to vary it. So I'm starting to use a mix of French ultramarine and Indian yellow. When you mix French ultramarine with a warm yellow, or with any yellow for that matter, you get a bit of a muted green. And the reason why is French ultramarine has a bit of warmth and red to it. And so when you mix it with yellow, you get a color that's composed of all three. blue, red, and yellow. So the green that you get is a little more muted, which I love. And you'll notice how some of the shadows are like that. And in some of the shadows, I add a bit of more red to it, so I kind of make it brown or dead color, which I like. And I try to keep it as varied as possible. Just for the interest's sake. And also notice how I'm not afraid, and I wasn't planning on doing this, but I'm not afraid to go really, really dark with that shadow, the cast shadow. I should have probably gone a little darker, but I was afraid because I make this mistake of going too dark sometimes. So in any case, I'm not afraid to push the contrast, and sometimes you need it, okay? Now this is a beautiful mixture of that green I told you about with the warm French ultramarine and the yellow, and you'll see now it's just a beautiful, beautiful mixture. And you can see if you look at the reference, all of these different small patches that have almost black to them. But now what I learned really is that shadows sometimes can be very confusing, and you'll be surprised to learn that a shadow that you thought was really dark ended up being not as dark. If you look at the top of the truck, in the middle section, you'll see this shadow under the part that's beveled outside, right above the curve where the sticker on the side of the truck is. This shadow looks really dark compared to the body of the truck. But if you compare it to the drop to the cast shadow under the truck, you can't even compare the two. The shadow under the truck is so much darker. The window at the front is so much darker. So shadows can be very misleading sometimes. You have to be really careful. So what I did here was kind of smart. I already set up the lightest values, and now I'm setting up the darkest values. And then I can come back and fill in the blanks in the middle, quote unquote. Now I changed the picture to a black and white version. Because I want you to see, I was actually working from the black and white picture from the moment I finished the first wash. I only used the first one for color reference, and you know me, I don't paint by the color I see in any case. So it was funny, but I did use it very loosely. Just to figure out what to do with the workers and their vests mainly. But then I switched to black and white. And the one thing I want you to notice, and you can take the video back a minute or two, compare this black and white version to the colorful version. The green looks much lighter in the colorful version. But then when you turn it black and white, it appears much darker. And there's a good reason for this, because what happens is this yellow is such a glowy artificial, this green is such a glowy artificial marker-like green that the vibrancy of the color can confuse you into thinking it's much lighter than it is when it's not, in fact. So this is something to watch out for. I find this to be a very common issue for me with foliage. It's always hard for me to assess whether the foliage is dark or light, just generally speaking. Because if you look at trees, especially if there is sunshine shining through them, you'll see that they almost look like a very bright yellow highlight. But then when you compare it to the sky, it's usually the lightest part of the tree is darker than the sky. So it's something that I learn how to work with and work around. But it's still a big challenge for me. Greens, when they are vibrant, can appear so much lighter than they actually are. And it's just a part of learning to read values and learning to assess what's dark and what's light. It's just a really important part of painting, in my opinion, and you learn it with time. So now I'm going back to some darker values for the bottom part of the truck. I actually made a mistake because what I'm doing now should have been in red, because this is a shiny red and yellow part, but I'm going to correct it later on. Now what you see me do is I'm just trying to figure out how to simplify what I see. And it's really hard, and not necessarily simplify, but even just represent. You see there are these weird hooks under the container, and it's just a very complex mingling of shapes, and I'm trying to figure out how I can portray it in a way that you, the viewer, can actually understand what you're looking at, but then again, I don't have to spell it out for you. And I really find that I love artwork that doesn't spell it out for me. I love the gap. I love when there's a gap between what I'm seeing and what I have to complete in my own mind to imagine. And this is why I love artists like Sargent that actually get you to complete some of the gaps. When I was in, and I didn't talk about it a lot, but I want to talk more about my US vacation. But we visited a few museums, and we were in the art museum as well, Cleveland Art Museum. And one of the things I noticed is there are many paintings there that are, very realistic, but they really spell it out for you and they show everything, and it leaves nothing for the imagination. I love when things are empty, but then again, it looks realistic. So, you know me. I talk about it a lot. So it's one of those things. It's why I love this book, which is work so much. Sargent is fantastic in oils, Also in watercolor, by the way. He has some beautiful watercolors. I don't know why I'm losing my voice occasionally. In any case, now you see how I'm indicating these shapes just by the shadow, because there was nothing there. I added a shadow, bam, there's a shape. And later on, when I'm going to add the dark shadow behind the truck, it's not really a shadow, it's just a dark glass window. You'll see how the truck shines immediately. So now I'm just starting to indicate that left part of the body of the truck is a little darker, and then I'm gonna do some wet and wet for the door and window, just because I don't want to again spell it out for you, and it's in the shadow. So things that are in the shadow tend to be less stressed and less emphasized. By the way, notice how I'm moving my brush around to accommodate for the line that I'm doing, because some lines require you to twist your hand a bit, come from a different direction. In the previous instance, to do a straight line from bottom to top, I had to twist my hand a bit, then go from bottom to top, sorry. So yeah. And while I'm doing everything, I'm aware, sorry, I have something in my throat, weird. I'm gonna drink water soon. I have to be aware of the edges. So this bottom edge, I was worried that it's gonna dry as I work on the mirror of the truck. So I took a break from the mirror, and I was like, I'm gonna finish this first. Now the cool part is now we have, again, if you analyze what we have mostly the highlights and then the very strong shadows. What we're missing is a mid value. We're missing something that'll be kind of in the middle. So for example, all of the bottom part of the truck between the wheels, in between the front and back wheel, are all things that are going to be mid value. And right now we don't have it. And the reason why we don't have it is I went immediately to the dark shadows. We do have some mid values, but we're missing a lot of them. So right now it's very high contrasted. It's light and dark. So what we're going to do in the next few steps is equalize it. We're going to add the mid values that will bring it down to the ground. And I'm going to tell you the exact moment when that happens, and you'll notice it happening. So right now I'm still adding the darker shadows, but soon you'll see I'm going to work on that the part above the front wheel. And the painting will tell you what it needs really, because if you look right now, the parts that are too light, they almost seem detached from the painting. That's very common. They seem like they are not fully related to the painting. So what you'll notice is that the moment you darken them, you kind of anchor them down, and you're gonna see this happening soon. So now I did this little chimney thing there. I don't know how you'd call it, that pipe. The bottom part of the pipe as well. Now I'm working on that. Again, following what I see with the light and shadow. So now I have a test paper, and here we go. Now I'm going to anchor this front part to the painting. It felt a bit detached, but now notice how as soon as I darken it, it feels like it becomes a part of the painting itself. Because before that, it didn't feel like it was part of it because it was too light. And now you see it's clicks in. And the more I add these smaller parts that kind of click in, the more it will feel like one whole shape. It does have this cool look right now. It does feel like it's three-dimensional, but it could be better, and this is exactly what I'm doing. This is exactly the mid value I'm talking about. Now, don't be mistaken into thinking that it's as dark as the cast shadow, because don't forget, right now it looks about similar to the cast shadow, but it's wet. The cast shadow was much darker. The shadow under the truck and where the wheels are, it was much darker in its wet form. Okay, so now it's dried, it's much lighter. You'll see in a few moments when this part dries. So yeah. The funny thing, I didn't, again, talk a lot about my US vacation yet. I'll probably do an update soon. But I did want to say that taking this I basically took a month-long break from painting. I did paint, but I could count the number of paintings I did during this month, and it's probably like 6. And they weren't really large, most of them. And some of the things I did weren't really paintings. It was more like sketches, like even pencil sketches. I'm just talking like artworks in general. It doesn't matter what type of artwork. And so what my point is that despite taking this long break, I actually feel like my abilities were, I don't know if they didn't get that hurt. It took me maybe a day to get back into business, to feel like, I can paint again. But then immediately afterwards, it's like I was left with the freshness of by the way, I love this part of the painting where I do the highlight, and later on you'll see me add the shadow, and it'll look beautiful, you'll see. But in any case, I was kind of left with just the freshness of not doing this for a while, and it felt really good. So I do think this break was important for me and was necessary. Now I'm zooming in, and now I'm starting to add more of the mid values of the shadows that are in between. Now notice again, this may seem dark, but it's also a really wet wash. So the moment it dries, it's going to dry a little lighter. And I'm figuring out now, I thought there's this cute highlight. Should I leave it? No, now I went over it. It's really a matter of feeling what the painting needs at the moment. Sometimes you change things spontaneously, and it's really important to be able to do that. So in any case, this break I think did a lot of good things, and now I'm happy to start being back on track, doing more videos. At the time of recording this narration, which is Wednesday, just one day before this video is planned to be out on Thursday, I filmed 2 new videos. One is going to be a really good watercolor exercise, and that I really recommend you try. I'll share more in the future. If you've been following me on Instagram, you may have seen a glimpse of it, or even Snapchat, or even Facebook for that matter. And another one is a book flip through. A book that I showed you on Instagram that you really liked. A lot of people have commented they wanted to see more works from the book, so I decided to film a flip through. It's going to be a surprise. I think you'll enjoy this one as well. So I have a nice stock of videos, and I should be ready to soon go back to the normal schedule and post more videos. So that's a good thing. It's doing YouTube is one of those things that when you're in the momentum, it's really easy to preserve it, and you continue recording and filming, and you have a you have a stash of videos prepared or pre-made. But then when you step out of the loop, it sometimes can be hard to go back. So I'm at this point right now, and it is a challenge, but it's still, I'm having a lot of fun, and slowly getting back to it, and it's just a good thing. I think I needed this cleaning time. So anyway, I zoomed in earlier. You got a better look at the people. Now I zoomed back out to add some of the darker shadows. Again, we're about, I think, halfway through the process here. But what's important to note is that this is probably the hardest half. So we're now in the clear. All that's left to do is to add some details to the truck, of course, and then to the, sorry about the changes in the volume. I'm getting closer and farther from the mic just because I noticed it wasn't loud enough. But in any case, you got a better look at the people. So now what's left to do is, again, add some of the mid values, add some details to the people, add the background, obviously. And then finally, what I love to do is bring out some of the shapes and be more precise using a thinner brush and just some dry brush strokes. That'll bring the shape of the, let's say, details on the wheels and on the tires, and details on the, for example, the front door to the truck. So these are kind of the small things that I'll add later on. And if I can recognize something that can already be added now, like these 2 small darker dots, I will add it. So here, for example, I'm adding the part that I told you I love with the shadow at the top, and then the highlight at the bottom. I love the way this looks. Yeah, it just seems to work. Now I'm doing something funny, and that is I'm flipping the painting upside down. And there's a good reason for me doing this, which is I figured that the wash I'm about to do is going to be easier to do upside down. Because first I want to deal with the truck and the negative painting in the end. So right now I'm just going from top to bottom or bottom to top, and it's easy because there's just the street. There's nothing there, not many details. Now I'm doing the lower part, and then I'm cutting spaces in between, and that's going to be the markings on the road. Okay, and now I'm getting to the part where I have to be a little more careful, so I water it down a bit, and I'm just careful not to touch the wash too much. Now, an important point to make at this stage is if this was a cheaper paper, it would have been really hard to add that wash without reawakening the cast shadow under the truck. Everything would have probably been smeared around, but because this is a good quality paper, I was able to do that. So that's one of the differences between good and bad paper. So I think it's really important to work with a good paper, more than paints, more than brushes, more than anything. So just thanks to this paper, I was able to do that. And I had to darken the road. I wasn't planning on doing that, but I ended up having to darken it. And I wanted to do the negative painting around these stripes on the road, the different markings. And so flipping it was a good idea, but again, if it wasn't good paper, I'd have a lot of trouble doing that. So now I'm working on the window, and this is the second picture. This is not the same one, okay? So I changed the picture to the one that actually shows the other worker. And now you can see, and I'm negative painting around the truck. And this is, I just followed the lines that I put in earlier. But now I figured it should be a little darker. So I'm adding a bit more darker color into the mixture, more French ultramarine mainly. I didn't want to have to do another wash on top of that. That would have been a nightmare, and it would have started getting overworked. So I just charged it with more thick, dark paint. Now, the most important part here is where, aside from the truck, is the person. This is where I really want to make sure I get the shape right and I don't mess it up. And also, you want to work fast because otherwise you get these weird streaks, the paint starts to dry, and then you'll get round markings around, for example, the head of the person or the body. And it's so obvious that you worked around it. And I don't get this wash to be as even as I'd wanted it to, but it's decent. It's fairly even, I would say. But you have to really up the pace, especially when you're doing a thick mixture like that. The drier the paint is to begin with, the faster it will dry. The more watery it is, the more of a breathing space you have, especially if it beads, then you have time to work. I don't know, I think the whole beading thing, I don't always let the paint bead, and maybe I should more. I don't know. So now the background. Here is a, let's say, compositional challenge. The technique I know how to do, but now it begs the question of how prominent do I want the background to be, how much of it I want people to see, and you don't want it to compete with the truck itself. So I'm being very, very, very careful not to have it too strong, to leave some highlights. For example, now with the air conditioned, the air-conditioned engines. I don't know what you'd call these if you have them. But in any case, I'm being very careful to paint around all of these and leave as few highlights as possible and make sure they don't pop too much. Okay, just the bare essentials, basically. And then going around the truck. I will add some shadows to the background because it's a must. You'll see later on how we have to do it. But it's not going to be anything too glaring or obvious because, again, you don't want it to compete. And this is also a part of knowing when to stop. And with this one, I'm really proud of myself. I figured out exactly the right time to stop and move on and not worry about adding more details. But in any case, I'm talking about something that happens only later on. So now I do a little bit of wet and wet just for the darker parts there. I figured it would be wise to put in some wet and wet areas right now. And by that, they will blend in, and then I won't have too obvious of an edge that will, again, compete with the truck and the workers. Now, notice how I'm balancing. There's another dark part on the left, but I'm not going as dark as I see it intentionally. And the reason why is because it's a little more to the left. It's more to the distance. It's outside the main part of the frame. I don't want to bring it forward too much. So even though in the reference it's as dark as the window on the right, I'm going much lighter. And notice how I'm not that accurate with I have a bit of a sloppy drawing skills with the brush today. I don't know why, but If you look at the window especially, you'll notice it. Even the truck, and sorry that I don't have the drawing process, I just never recorded it. But I did decide to show you the painting process. But in any case, the truck isn't as accurate in terms of perspective and things like this. But it does get the job done, and it does get the right impression. So somehow that ended up working out. Now the top edge of the truck in the middle is something that I'll also make pop in the future. Now I'm darkening even more that part from earlier. But in any case, the top part is something I'm going to get a little darker still, a little more contrasted with the background by further darkening parts of it. You'll see soon when I start working on the background again. But for now, I kind of want to complete the different parts of the truck that I still haven't. So now again, darkening this part, and notice how darkening really anchored it to the truck. Now, one of the main parts and most important parts are the figures. So these two guys are what you'd call like, I don't know, religious Jews, Jewish people. So they have kippas on their heads, which is the rounded thing. I thought I'd include it just to make it more authentic and because it created a nice contrast with the background. So I was like, why not? So I added it in. I also plan on trying to get this painting into a gallery. So I think showing the everyday life and how it runs and being very authentic, I think is important because this is just a moment in life, which is why I love this painting. And again, a lot of people tell me, why did you decide to paint this particular reference? And it's always like seemingly boring stuff like old cars and this garbage truck. And I always say it's just something about them that captivated me and that I love personally. And it always shows. When you love the thing you paint, it always shows. So I'd rather do this than, let's say, a very perfect seascape like many artists can pull off. I find them boring and I find that I don't know what to do with them. But these kinds of paintings of old vehicles and people in work and landscapes and cityscapes are my favorite. I know what to do with these and I know how to hopefully bring out the best of them. Now I had a big issue with the vests because they didn't feel like they were shining enough and I was so close to the picture to see it for what it is. So I decided to just darken these straps or the pattern on it and leave the rest quite light and see how that works. So I'm going with the dark for the pants. These pants are going to be a little lighter than the guy on the left because I made a mistake with the guy on the left and I went a little too dark. So we'll see how that works out once I add the darker shadow for these. And now you can start to understand why I'm running this at double speed. Like we're already 32 minutes into the process. I mean, we're not that far from finishing, but still it's like, if we'd have watched it all in real time, that'll be a bit slow, I think. So now I'm adding some color to the hands, to the skin tone, a bit of hair, and then I leave some place for the ear. There's a strong highlight on the ear. I'm sorry you can't see this now. It's on the other picture. But in any case, yeah. Now I'll soon go back. There was just a small mark on the kippa, so I've added it in. And I'll soon go back to the pants and darken what's necessary there. To make the shadows visible. You'll see I really messed up with the guy on the left because it won't allow me, because I already went too dark, it won't allow me to bring out too much of the shadows in the next wash, but that's fine. Now here I felt like I needed more contrast. If you look at the reference, there is more contrast between the guy and the truck, and this part should be darker, so I added that, and this small part of the truck, the small dot on the right. Now I'm going back with some red paint, fresh red paint. I dabbed too much paint on his pants. Now I'm trying to clean it off, dabbing it with a towel. And now I'm coming back with some yellow soon in just a moment and adding this interesting pattern to the truck that I told you I made a mistake. The blue part should actually be red, and then the part that was left open should be yellow. But in any case, now I allowed enough time for the pants to dry so I can come back and add the shadows in, and hopefully it'll look right. Sometimes it's tricky getting these, the nuances of how dark or light something is, especially if there's a lot of dark values and not necessarily strikingly strong contrast. So it can be a little hard. Now there is a strong shadow on the arms that I finally get in now because earlier I had to cover them all up. And it's still, for the guy on the left, it's still not dark enough, so I just went ahead and covered his entire arm. And now I'm adding the shadow to the pants, and again, now you notice I went a little too dark, so it's still visible, it's still okay. Now adding the background. Sorry, I forgot to hit record for the upper part, but it's not that important of a segment, so it's okay. We only lost like a minute of footage, something like that. So in any case, now I'm adding just the shadows there. There are many shadows that are coming just due to the shape of the building. So I'm exploiting that to create a better contrast with the truck, and to give the background some character. And this is always a challenge. When I did Steve Mitchell from the Mind of Watercolor, when I did his portrait, this is where I messed up. I went way too detailed with the background. Here I'm not going to make the same mistake again. I'm using very few details, making sure I don't overdo it. I'm going to do some wet in wet here to put in some stronger shadows on the right, but that's pretty much it. I don't want to add too much. What I will do is add some wires and cables going around, because wherever you go here in the center of Tel Aviv, you see these wires going around, and it looks really sloppy. I actually saw a funny video on that of a couple of vloggers I've been following for a while now that make fun of the electricity work there, and they're like, this is terrible. And then they started thinking, is it terrible or is it harder to do it that way? You'll soon see what I mean with all the cables and wires running around. I think it's pretty common for the more, let's say, sloppy downtown areas in many different cities, the more younger districts, I guess. So now some dry brush. Here's the dry brush adventure begins. I'm going to bring out the shadows on the actual engines of the air conditions a little stronger. I'm going to bring them out a little more. In terms of darkness, this is probably as dark as I want the background to be. Maybe just a little darker for the wires, but not a lot more. So we're done value-wise. And notice how it's quite different from the reference. I changed a lot of things around. These engines should all be in the shadow, but I decided to do it that way. I added some diagonal shadows to them as well real quick, but you may have not noticed it was really quick. My bad. And now I'm adding these wires I've been talking about so much that add a bit of movement to it. They break the pattern, and I think add just some interest to the whole painting. And now the one thing I want to direct your attention to is I'm working with the rigger brush, and it's really hard getting the right consistency of paint on it. So don't worry if this is something that challenges you. I'm being challenged by it every day. It takes a lot of practice to get the right consistency. Same thing when I'm signing with my name. I'm going to talk about it later on. I'm going to show you some of the mixing. Sometimes it takes me the longest to do the mixture for the signature. So it's just, it's funny to say, but that's really how it is. You want to get a line that's a little broken, a little dry brush, but not too much. And it is a challenge. So don't worry if it challenges you. Now what I'm doing is basically the same thing, only with this Princeton brush. I didn't talk a lot about this brush so far, but it's a Princeton round brush. It's size 28, size 12. They have another 29 number for some reason. I find it really good. It's synthetic, completely synthetic, so it has a strong spring to it. And I find it great for dry brush, for adding these small details later on. So this is exactly what I'm doing with it. And I decided to even darken the cast shadow with it, with dry brush, because I wanted it to not reawaken what's under it. That will probably not happen because of the good paper, but in any case, this felt right. And just adding a few details here and there, and strengthening some of the shadows that should be a little darker, like right here under the container, and then under the wheels, just the different details. And this is the stage where you can really take your time and add more details at your leisure. It's just important to notice when you're done, when you don't need to add more, because it's easy to add more and more details and make it maybe a little stale and lose some of the dynamics of the painting. So I want to avoid that, and this is why I finished this one quite early, I'd say, but in a good state, I think. So now if you look at the background, I think it came together really nicely. It complements the truck, doesn't take too much of its attention. The truck is the main center of interest, and with the two people around it that are kind of an even smaller but more focused area of interest. I think in terms of the composition, what I should have done a little differently is I should have moved the whole frame down, meaning I should imagine this is a camera. I should have moved the camera up. I needed to show a little less of the building and a little more of the road. This is the one lesson I learned from this, to plan out my composition just a little bit better. And I did improve significantly, but still a bit of a way to go here with this one, because you just see a lot of the actual street, the paved road, and it doesn't play that important of a role. I was able to make it interesting with all the color variation. You can see some red at the bottom left corner. You can see some blue. It's interesting, but it doesn't play that important of a role compositionally, so I probably could have dropped many of the details there. So now I'm adding these strong shadows to their arms, and we're really nearly done. I'm just gonna make a quick mixture for my signature here. And you can see it takes some time, and I test it out, and this is double speed. And once I feel like I'm happy with the result, you see it takes a long time sometimes, and you can't see it because of the picture, so sorry about that. Should have removed it probably, because now it's just the signature. And yes, some details for the vest. Oh, I forgot about that. Yes, I added just a very thin orange wash to the vests, and I wanted to make sure I don't accidentally go too dark, because that would have ruined the whole contrast. But then again, I had to do this quick, otherwise I would have smeared the dry brush from earlier just a bit, and then even just a bit would ruin it. But in any case, now I'm preparing my signature. Sorry about that, about the confusion. I did this just a few days ago, and I already forgot some of the process. But in any case, you see I'm mixing, testing, and finally I got the right consistency, and I signed this. And once I'm done, I'm going to show you the final result, and I'm going to show you it zoomed in as well. Here's the final result, and now I'm going to show it to you more zoomed in. I hope you enjoyed this one. Let's wrap it up.
Okay, so we're done here, and this is the final result. I feel like there is more to add, there is more to change, but I'm stopping myself now because I also think this is a good spot to stop. For example, I would have thought to darken this area and that area, but I did achieve a balance in which the main item, the main, let's say, point of interest is popping more, and then there's the two people here, and I don't want anything to compete with that, and I do feel like it's at a good stage. I could add some more details here inside the shadows, but I feel like it just works, so I'm gonna stop now. I really hope you enjoyed this one. Again, the paints I use are the sap green here, French ultramarine, this Indian yellow, the cadmium red, I believe, or cadmium red light, and just a mixture of all of these to create, I guess, interest. So my base paint was the sap green, but then I spiced it up with some French ultramarine and Indian yellow to make my own greens that you can see around the shadowy areas, and that way you get a combination of the paint that's more easily accessible and then the paint that's more interesting. So this is it. The background, really, I try to keep it simple. I didn't want to make it too complicated, because what happens to me many times is if I go too detailed with the background, I lose the sense of depth here. Not to say that there's the best sense of depth here, but I do think it works. So now for the big moment, I allowed this some time to dry properly, and now we can remove the tape, because usually I'll let it dry for like a day, but now it's fine because it's already dried enough, because I did the previous layers yesterday. So in any case, I'm going to remove the tape, and you're going to see what it looks like with the frame. I already signed this one too. I think this is going to be a good one for a local gallery, for example, because it shows just a local view and let's say an everyday or a day-to-day occurrence of just the garbage truck picking up everything. So I think it's just a good scene and an interesting scene to include. So with that being said, here it is. without the tape. Hopefully you like the result. Let me hold it up a little closer to the camera so you can see. And also some of the details. I love how this area turned out with the embossed parts, I guess. Just this shape with the shadow at the top and the highlight at the bottom. I think the background is well balanced. I like how the people turned out, and hopefully you like it too. So with that being said, let's wrap up this video. Okay, so I really hope you enjoyed this process. Here's the final result. Once again, I did allow it enough time to dry so that it mostly flattened out. It's not that wavy or buckled, and this is something that I do get a lot of questions about. So if you just let your painting dry for about, I guess, 4 hours, that'll be good. Some say overnight, but I don't think that's really necessary, but about 4 hours, and then it will flatten out completely. Even if it's really buckled under the tape, as long as it's taped down, it's gonna unbuckle. So that's a quick tip for you. I really hope you enjoyed this process. Again, I think this is a nice kind of everyday scene. And it shows how you can take a picture that's not that fascinating, and people keep telling me that it isn't necessarily the most interesting views or pictures. It's just something ordinary, and then turn it into something interesting as long as you, the artist, recognize something special about it. Okay, so if you tend to paint things that people are like, why are you painting that? Stick to your guns and keep doing it if it feels like the scene provides an inspiration for you, because what I tend to realize with time is that you do tend to gravitate towards certain references, certain objects, and they do tend to work if you enjoy painting them. Okay, so I do recommend you keep doing that. And with that being said, let's wrap up this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this one. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm starting to up the frequency of videos slowly now that I have a nice workspace that I can actually work from. I got back from the vacation, now there's the Israeli holidays, so that's a bit of a distraction. But in any case, I'm trying to move into a routine where I can tell you with confidence that I'm gonna post 3 videos a week, 2 videos. We're gonna see what the routine is gonna be like exactly, but I do want to go there because the YouTube rewards videos that are published more consistently, and if you don't publish consistently, it's just not gonna promote the channel, and I do want this channel to grow. So in any case, thank you so much for your support, your likes, your comments. Everything really helps with the channel development. I really appreciate you sticking around. I hope you enjoy the videos, the tutorials. There are many other types, so if this is the first one you watched, there are many other interesting ones, paint reviews and product reviews in general, and sketching videos, so definitely check these out, and I will see you again in another vid real soon. Take care.